To get a feel for this set of tendencies, think about the following propositions. How plausible do you find each one? People have substantial control over their life outcomes, and they much prefer situations in which they have choice and control to those in which they do not. People want to achieve personal success. They find that relationships with other people can sometimes make it harder to attain their goals. People want to be unique, to be different from other people in significant respects. People want to feel good about themselves. Excelling in some ways and being assured of their good qualities by other people are important to personal well-being. People like their relationships with others to be based on mutuality and equality, but if some people have more power than others, most people prefer to be in the superior position. People believe that the same rules should apply to everyone. Individuals should not be singled out for special treatment because of their social role or personal attributes. Justice is, or should be, blind. Hundreds of millions of people are reasonably well described by these propositions, but those people tend to be found in particular parts of the world, namely Western Europe and many of the present and former nations of the British Commonwealth, including the United States, Canada, and Australia. These societies tend to be highly independent or individualistic cultures. Westerners think of themselves as distinct social entities, tied to each other by bonds of affection and organizational memberships to be sure, but essentially separate from other people and having attributes that exist in the absence of any connection to others. They tend to see their associations with other people, even their own family members, as voluntary and subject to termination once those associations become sufficiently troublesome or unproductive. Independent, individualistic culture. A culture in which people tend to think of themselves as distinct social entities, tied to each other by voluntary bonds of affection and organizational memberships, but essentially separate from other people, and having attributes that exist in the absence of any connection to others. Table 1.2. Independent versus interdependent cultures. Independent cultures. Conception of the self as distinct from others with attributes that are constant. Insistence on ability to act on one's own. Need for individual distinctiveness. Preference for achieved status based on accomplishments. Conviction that rules governing behavior should apply to everyone. Interdependent cultures. Conception of the self as inextricably linked to others, with attributes depending on the situation. Preference for collective action. Desire for harmonious relations within group. Acceptance of hierarchy and ascribed status based on age, group membership, and other attributes. Preference for rules that take context and particular relationships into account. But these characterizations provide a poor description of most of the world's people, particularly the citizens of East Asian countries such as China, Japan, and Korea, as well as people from South Asian countries such as India, people from the Middle East, people from many Latin American countries, and people from Eastern Europe. These societies represent more interdependent or collectivistic cultures. People in such cultures don't have as much freedom or personal control over their lives, and they don't necessarily want or need it. Such differences between people in independent and interdependent societies have important implications for the nature of their personal goals and strivings, values, and beliefs, as Box 1.1 illustrates. Success is important to East Asians, but in good part because it brings credit to the family and other groups to which they belong, rather than merely as a reflection of personal merit. Interdependent, collectivistic culture. A culture in which people tend to define themselves as part of a collective, inextricably tied to others in their group and placing less importance on individual freedom or personal control over their lives. Among traditional Kenyan tribespeople, the individualist is looked upon with suspicion. There is no really individual affair, for everything has a moral and social influence. Jomo Kenyatta, 1938, first president of independent Kenya. Personal uniqueness is not very important to interdependent peoples and may in fact be undesirable. In an experiment by Kim and Marcus, 1999, Korean and American participants were offered a pen as a gift for being in a study. Several of the pens were of one color and one pen was of another color. Americans tended to choose the unique color and Koreans the common color. Being unique and being better than others are not so important for interdependent peoples to feel good about themselves. Moreover, feeling good about themselves is itself not as important a goal as it is for Westerners and other interdependent peoples. Interdependent people tend not to expect or even value mutuality and equality in relationships. On the contrary, they're likely to expect hierarchical relations to be the rule. They tend not to be universalists in their understanding of social norms. Instead, they believe in different strokes for different folks. Justice should keep her eyes wide open, paying attention to the particular circumstances of each case that comes before her. To the extent that culture influences deep patterns of thinking and feeling, a central theme in this book, we would expect these influences to be reflected in differences in a person's brain. For example, the density of neurons in a region that supports culture-related thought. And indeed, culture appears to shape the human brain. In one recent study, 265 Chinese participants had images of their brains taken and then completed measures of how independent, I do whatever I believe is right, or interdependent, I regularly sacrifice for the group, they were. Those participants who were more independent actually showed denser gray matter, increased cell bodies of neurons, in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which supports attention and thought about the self, and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is thought to support thoughts of self-agency. Some qualifications. Much of the early research on the distinction between independence and interdependence focused on comparing Western countries with East Asian ones, but there appear to be variations of interdependence and independence in other cultures as well. For example, in Latino American cultures more than in Asian American cultures, interdependence involves what is called familialism, a social value defined by interpersonal warmth, closeness, and support. Latinos who feel a great sense of familialism enjoy greater well-being and stronger relationships, but they also experience greater stress, in particular when faced with moving away from family, for example, to attend a faraway college. Box 2.1, Focus on Culture. Dick and Jane, Deng and Janxing. The first page of a reader for American children from the 1930s shows a little boy running with his dog. See Dick run. The primer reads, See Dick run and play. The first page of a Chinese reader from the same era shows a little boy sitting on the shoulders of a bigger boy. Big brother loves little brother, reads the text. Little brother loves big brother. The difference between what the American child and the Chinese child of the 1930s were exposed to on the first day of school says much about the differences between their worlds. The American child is taught to orient toward action and to be prepared to live in a world where control and individual choice are normal. The Chinese child is more likely to be taught to be attuned to relationships. To Westerners, it makes sense to speak of the existence of the person apart from any group. To East Asians, Chinese, Japanese, and Koreans, for example, and to many of the world's other peoples, the person exists only as a member of a larger collective. Family, friends, village, corporation. People are related to one another like ropes in a net, completely interconnected and having no real existence without the connections. Attention to action versus relationships. A. The Dick and Jane readers of the United States emphasize action and individualism, as shown here with the drawing of Dick running and the words, see Dick run. B. East Asian readers are more likely to emphasize relationships, as seen in this Chinese reader in which two boys walk down the street with their arms around each other. The text says, Xiao Zhang is a very nice boy. He is my best friend. We always study together and play together. We have a lot of fun together. Recent research has also extended the independence-interdependence framework to the understanding of another kind of culture, social class, which captures the degree of wealth, education, and occupational prestige a person enjoys. Within many cultures, there are social class differences in independence versus interdependence. Working-class people in modern societies are more interdependent than middle-class individuals. Working-class people have more interactions with their families than middle-class individuals do. Their parenting styles emphasize conformity and obedience more than those of middle-class individuals. and they value personal uniqueness less than middle-class individuals do. A study by Stevens and her colleagues provides a striking example of the different values placed on uniqueness. The researchers asked people how they would feel if a friend bought a car just like one they themselves had recently bought. Middle-class people were likely to report that they would be disappointed because they like to be unique. Working-class people were more likely to say they would be very happy to share that similarity with a buddy. Middle-class people also appear to care much more about exercising choice than do working-class people. Middle-class people were found to like an object that they had chosen better than one they were given. The reverse was true for working-class people. It's important to bear in mind that it's probably not accurate to put any society entirely in one box or another, to say that some are independent in all respects and others are interdependent in all respects. The American South, for example, is more interdependent than much of the rest of the country in that family, connections, and community ties tend to be more important. However, the South has been described as more tolerant of character quirks and various kinds of social deviance than other regions of the country, clearly individualistic tendencies. As a final qualification, researchers have found that the same person can have a relatively independent orientation in some situations, such as competing in a debate tournament, and a relatively interdependent orientation in others, such as singing in a choir. Familialism and Latin cultures. Familialism, close contact with extended family, who provide strong emotional and material support, is particularly characteristic of Hispanic people. Culture and gender roles. Earlier, the discussion focused on some aspects of gender roles that seem to be universal. But gender roles vary greatly around the world and, as already noted, can even vary within subcultures in the same country. Male dominance is one of the most variable aspects of gender roles. In hunter-gatherer societies, the predominant male role is to hunt, the predominant female role is to gather plants. Despite the sharp demarcation of gender roles, such societies are relatively gender egalitarian. In fact, the social structures are characterized by weak hierarchies in general. Leaders have little power over others. Many Western cultures are also relatively gender egalitarian, especially Northwestern European countries and most especially Scandinavian countries. For example, women constitute almost half the membership of the parliament in Sweden. Relative status of women in the rest of the world ranges from the Scandinavian extreme of equality to near slavery conditions for women. The kinds of sexual relations that are considered normal and appropriate also vary enormously. Overwhelmingly, polygamy, one man with several wives, and serial monogamy are the most common practices among the world's subcultures, and that may have been the case for thousands of years. The traditional American ideal of lifetime monogamy is a rarity. The United States is considered decidedly prudish by many Western Europeans, for whom extramarital affairs are commonplace. On the other hand, in certain cultures, women, and sometimes even men, who are suspected of having extramarital affairs are put to death. Indeed, a woman who is raped might be expelled from the family circle or even killed. Gay and lesbian people in some societies may be put to death. Until just a generation or so ago, gays and lesbians in certain European countries were routinely sentenced to prison. In contrast, in some Native American cultures, bisexual men were admired as being two-spirit people, and in yet other cultures, homosexual behavior is so unremarkable that there is no term for either the practice or the type of person who engages in it. It's a matter of some disagreement among social scientists whether the different sexual mores, norms, that characterize various cultures are merely arbitrary or whether most of them have economic or other practical roots. An example of an economic explanation concerns farmers in Nepal and Tibet who practice a form of polyandry, one wife with many husbands who are brothers. This system serves the economic goal of keeping scarce agricultural land in one family and produces just one set of related heirs per generation. A similar purpose was served by primogeniture, a common rule in Western Europe that only the firstborn male could inherit land. Otherwise, estates would be broken up into ever smaller units, and the original power of the landowning family would dwindle away to the status of ordinary peasants. In this book, we frequently return to discussions of gender. Women and men differ in the way they understand themselves, as well as in their emotions and motivations, but these diverse patterns are far from being constant across cultures. There are many ways of constructing gender. Culture and gender roles. Women constitute almost 50% of politicians in Scandinavia. Their representation goes all the way to the top. A. Joanna Sigurðardóttir, Prime Minister of Iceland, 2009 to 2013. B. Erna Solberg, Prime Minister of Norway, 2013 to present. C. Mari Kiviniemi, Prime Minister of Finland, 2010 to 2011. D. Helle Thorning-Schmidt, Prime Minister of Denmark, 2011 to present. Culture and evolution as tools for understanding situations. Both evolution and culture affect how people see the world and behave within it. The two together are complementary ways of understanding social relations. For the first 100,000 years or so of human existence, our ancestors were largely concerned with the necessities of surviving, reproducing, and nourishing their young in a fundamentally social environment. Such challenges may have resulted in the evolution of pre-wired inclinations towards certain behaviors and ways of thinking, but such inclinations are tools that can be applied flexibly or not at all, and many, if not most, of these tools are highly modifiable by culture. Different ecologies and economies placed people in situations that varied markedly from one another, and in turn produced different social systems and practices. Evolution has given us the capacity for an astonishingly wide range of behaviors. Whether a society develops a particular pre-wired inclination or not may depend on how adaptive the behavior is for the ecological, economic, and cultural circumstances people find themselves in. Far from making us rigidly programmed automatons, evolution has equipped us with a large repertoire of tools for dealing with the enormous range of circumstances that humans confront. Our circumstances and our high intelligence determine which tools we developed and which tendencies we try to override. Looking back, people in some cultures are characteristically individualistic or independent, whereas people in many other societies are more likely to be collectivistic or interdependent. Individualism involves defining the self as having attributes that exist apart from one's relations with other people. Those who are more interdependent define themselves in terms of their relations with others. These differences have important implications for many of the most important phenomena of social psychology. Gender roles and sexual mores are examples of behaviors that differ widely from one culture to another. Evolution and culture both make important contributions to understanding human social behavior. Evolution predisposes us to certain behaviors, but culture determines which behaviors are likely to be developed in particular situations. The uses of social psychology. When you decided to take this course, you knew you were going to learn some interesting things about human behavior. You may have even hoped that the knowledge would be helpful in your daily life. Indeed, it will. But you will gain more from this course than you might have anticipated. Using social psychology. The potential uses of social psychology are boundless. Examples include how to structure work or study groups, such as the one pictured here, to maximize performance, how to combat bullying in schools, how to reduce prejudice and discrimination, and how to craft a public service campaign. Social psychology and critical thinking. Many of your college courses teach not only facts and methods of research, but also how to reason. Mathematics courses, for example, teach rules of logic. Literature courses teach how to read a text closely to derive intended meanings that may not be obvious on the surface. Such reasoning tools can be applied broadly in everyday professional and personal life. It's our belief that there is no better way to improve critical thinking than by studying social psychology. Courses in social psychology present a great deal of information about scientific methods. Unlike most other sciences, though, social psychology presents those methods in the context of common everyday events. This makes it easier to learn to apply them very broadly to daily problems. Take, for example, statistics. The examples used in statistics courses typically concern agricultural plots, IQ tests, and other phenomena not drawn from ordinary life, which means that statistics courses by themselves have a limited impact on critical reasoning. When knowledge about statistics is applied to everyday life, however, the gain for reasoning in general is very great. People will come to apply statistical heuristics or rules of thumb to choices they make each day, to understanding the behavior of other people, and to scientific claims they encounter in the media. The same is true of many methodological concepts such as the need for control groups. Two of the authors of this book have written a great deal about how to improve critical thinking. Much of what they have shown to be effective is achieved to a substantial extent in a social psychology course. But we believe that even more can be done to improve critical thinking skills by engaging you in exercises that make use of the scientific tools you will develop by reading about research on particular topics. To bring home lessons in critical reasoning, we highlight in each chapter various ways of applying critical tools to everyday life events. Social media, uses and abuses. Through social media, we have almost limitless access to information from and about other people and current events. This can make us informed or misinformed, happy or unhappy, depending on how we make use of it. Good reasoning principles are essential to understanding the world, but they aren't enough. Almost as important as having good reasoning principles is making sure that the information we are reasoning about is accurate. Unfortunately, much of the information available to us is distorted or flat out wrong. This is partly because our techniques for getting information are flawed. We are often content with inadequate or mistaken information, hastily obtained or obtained by means of cognitive processes that are error-prone. Information provided to us by others can be misleading or false, sometimes intentionally so. To help you better develop critical thinking skills, at many places in the book we point to mistaken procedures for obtaining and interpreting information made available to us by friends and family, the media, including social media, and the internet. We also propose techniques for ensuring that information about important matters is the most accurate possible. Uses and abuses of social media. Today there are over 1.9 billion people on Facebook, 1 billion of whom are active users who have logged into Facebook sometime in the past month. As of April 2016, over 40 billion photos have been shared on Instagram worldwide. It is estimated that people share 6 billion emoji a day worldwide. Social media have been pivotal in recent political protests, from the Arab Spring to the upheaval in Myanmar, and have been central to the dynamics of every election campaign around the world. It doesn't surprise social psychologists that these relatively new platforms are so widely used, for we are a hypersocial species that will connect and communicate through whatever medium we have available to us. But the density and prevalence of social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Reddit, and Tumblr, to name a few, raise the overarching question of what our social lives and selves are like online. Throughout this book, we will draw on the social psychology of social media to seek answers to these questions. We will consider, for example, when too much Facebook use might get you down, what your identity is like online, and how our attitudes and behaviors are influenced by new communication technologies. Social psychology and the good life. What draws people to social psychology is its relevance to their lives. In the past 20 years, social psychologists have turned their attention to one of the most personally relevant questions people have been asking for centuries. What is happiness? The answer to this question matters more than you might imagine. A wealth of studies find that feeling happy is associated with greater marital satisfaction, heightened creativity and productivity, and more robust physical health. Seeking to understand what makes us happy isn't just narcissistic navel-gazing. The question has wide-ranging and important implications for the kinds of lives we will lead. The good life. Social psychology has provided us with lots of clues about what makes us happy and what makes us unhappy. Clues that just living doesn't necessarily provide. How then might you find happiness? The answers to this question are myriad and nuanced, and depend critically on what stage of life you are in, your cultural background, and your upbringing. But hundreds of studies from social psychology offer some wisdom you might consider in your pursuit of the good life. You'll learn that certain things we might assume would influence our happiness profoundly, money, for example, and getting old, don't shape our well-being as much as we might think. You'll also learn about simple practices that have been shown to boost happiness, such as being generous, expressing gratitude to others, and valuing experiences over material objects. The good life also requires that you learn how to handle the stress that comes with being overwhelmed by the circumstances that you face. Regrettably, people are experiencing more stress today than they did 30 years ago. And stress, especially when it is chronic, can have extraordinary costs for your health, increasing the likelihood of disease and even damaging your DNA. In light of this, we will present scientifically tested ideas about how to handle stress in your personal life. Practices such as learning how to distance yourself a bit from your problems, avoiding rumination and unnecessary worry, and practicing mindful meditation. Looking back, in addition to learning many useful facts about human behavior, this course will substantially improve your critical thinking, will help you to make the most of your use of social media, and will detail many ways to improve the quality of your life. Chapter Review. Summary. Characterizing social psychology. Social psychology is the scientific study of the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors of individuals in social situations. The power of the situation. Social psychology emphasizes the influence of situations on behavior. People often find it difficult to see the role that powerful situations can play in producing their own and others' behavior, and so are inclined to overemphasize the importance of personal dispositions in producing behavior. These two tendencies together are called the fundamental attribution error. The role of construal. Social psychology also focuses on the role of construal in understanding situations. People often feel that their comprehension of situations is direct, without much mediating thought. In fact, even the perception of the simplest objects rests on substantial inference and the complex cognitive structures that exist for carrying it out. The primary tool people use for understanding social situations, and physical stimuli for that matter, is the schema. Schemas are stored representations of numerous repetitions of highly similar stimuli in situations. They tell us how to interpret situations and how to behave in them. Stereotypes are schemas of people of various kinds: police officers, Hispanics, yuppies. Stereotypes serve to guide interpretation and behavior, but they can often be mistaken or misapplied, and they can lead to damaging interactions and unjust behaviors. Automatic versus controlled processing. People's construals of situations are often largely automatic and non-conscious. As a consequence, people are sometimes in the dark about how they reached a particular conclusion or why they behaved in a particular way. People perceive many things non-consciously and have little access to cognitive processes, in part because they have no need for conscious access to these things. Evolution and human behavior, how we are the same. The evolutionary perspective focuses on practices and understandings that are universal and seem to be indispensable to social life, suggesting that humans are pre-wired to engage in those practices. Natural selection has operated on human behaviors just as it has on physical traits. Some evolutionary theorists talk about universal characteristics that are cognitive in nature, including language, which appears at the same stage of development in all cultures, and theory of mind, which also develops early in normal people of all cultures. Some have argued that some differences between males and females may be explained by the differential parental investment required of the two sexes. Pre-wiring does not imply lack of modifiability. Human behavior is highly susceptible to being changed. To assume that humans have a genetic predisposition to behave in particular ways does not mean it is right to behave in those ways. Believing that because things are a particular way means they should be that way is to commit the naturalistic fallacy. Culture and human behavior, how we are different. Behaviors and meanings can differ dramatically across cultures. Many of these differences involve the degree to which a society is independent or individualistic, characterized by fewer social relationships of a looser sort, or whether it is interdependent or collectivistic, characterized by many relationships of a highly prescribed nature. These differences influence conceptions of the self and the nature of human relationships, as well as basic cognitive and perceptual processes. Gender roles and sexual mores differ enormously across cultures. Even within the West, gender and sexual practices diverge significantly. Theorists differ in how strongly they believe that this variability is arbitrary versus rooted in economic factors or some other aspect of the objective situation confronting the culture. The uses of social psychology. Scientific methods, when applied to everyday life events, provide reasoning skills that are very widely applicable. This text focuses on maximizing gains to critical thinking and learning how to make optimal use of social media. Think about it. 1. How does social psychology differ from related disciplines such as personality psychology and sociology? How might a social psychologist, in contrast to researchers in other disciplines, try to understand the atrocities at Abu Ghraib? 2. What does the Milgram experiment on obedience demonstrate about the power of the situation? What features of the experimental situation might have increased the likelihood that participants would continue to shock the learner even after the learner showed signs of pain? 3. Why are schemas so important for social interaction? What is your schema for being a student in a classroom? What might happen if you didn't have that schema? 4. When trying to understand people's thoughts, feelings, and motivations, why don't researchers just ask them? What does research on automatic versus controlled processing tell us about people's awareness of their own mental states? 5. How does evolution help explain social behavior? What are some types of behaviors that seem most likely to be explained by evolution, and what behaviors seem less likely? 6. What is the naturalistic fallacy, and why is it so important to avoid when considering evolutionary explanations? 7. How do Western and Eastern countries differ in their beliefs about the role of the self in relation to the group? How might these beliefs lead to different behaviors in an academic setting? 8. Are evolutionary and cultural explanations for behavior compatible? How might these two perspectives complement each other when it comes to explaining gender differences in mate selection? The answer guidelines for the Think About It questions can be found at the back of the book.